Hey everybody, today I am in probably the least scenic location that I have used in a very, very long time to film an all-new car. But unfortunately, there are a number of forest fires going on right now, there's the COVID pandemic, and as a result, a lot of places are closed, and they've closed their parking lots as well. And then in addition to that, we have a lovely windstorm right now. And in all of that, I have been able to drive the all-new Polestar 2. This is one of the newest electric vehicles on sale in the United States and the newest electric car brand, because Polestar has said that aside from the Polestar 1, which was a plug-in hybrid, all of the other Polestars that we will ever see are going to be fully electric. And this model right here, the all-new Polestar 2, is one of the very few direct competitors in the entire world to the Tesla Model 3, Tesla's compact luxury sedan. If you look at the Polestar 2 and you think to yourself, it sure looks like there's a lot of Volvo going on here, then you're not wrong. And that's something that Polestar is absolutely not running away from. You see, Polestar started out as Volvo's performance tuning company. It was a separate company. Volvo then acquired them and made them a performance brand within the Volvo lineup. And then Volvo ended up spinning them off. And now what is Polestar is co-owned by Volvo and Volvo's parent company, Geely. So I guess you could say that this is entirely owned by Geely, but the path that it got there is a little unusual. The split between Volvo and Polestar is a little interesting because this is not like Toyota and Lexus. Polestar models are going to be priced definitely within the Volvo pricing envelope. They're targeting a different customer, however. Polestar is targeting someone that wants the latest in technology, they want the full EV, and they want it now. They don't want to wait until Volvo electrifies in the future. And someone that wants more modern, cleaner design that's perhaps a little colder is not the right word, but not quite the warm and homey feeling that we get in modern Volvos. But there's definitely a lot going on that is similar. And Polestar models are apparently going to be where we're going to see new technology first. So for instance, this is the first car in the lineup to get matrix LED headlamps. Those are really cool. Sadly, in America, they're not going to do a whole lot for you because of America's really honestly stupid lighting laws. So if you want to see those changed, now is the time to reach out to your representative and your senator and tell them to change America's dumb headlamp laws. They tell us that if those laws changed, then these could be reprogrammed via an over-the-air update and they would suddenly do all of their magic. Styling is somewhat like Volvo. We have a Thor's hammer-like headlamp here, but Polestar says that over time, this is going to diverge from Volvo in terms of styling. No modern EV would be complete without storage under the hood, so we find a frunk up here. This has just about 1.5 cubic feet of storage available. This is where we find the jack right there. You can store your charger if you want to. And if I lift the load floor, this is where we find the Can-A-Fix-A-Flat and the tire iron. There's not too much additional storage space for the driver under there, so this is definitely a slightly smaller frunk than we find in the Tesla Model 3. If we take a look down the front, you'll notice that we do have openings in that grille. It's because EVs still require some cooling. This is where we find the radar sensor, 360-degree camera right there, some larger openings down there at the bottom, and then you can see that we get fog lamps down there below the headlights. At this point, I need to apologize for a few things in this video. You may hear planes going on, beeps in the background, etc. I've had very, very little time with the Polestar 2. This has to be back in San Francisco by 3 p.m. and right now it is 1:20 and I still have a whole video to film, so sorry about that one. I may also accidentally call this a Volvo at some point in this video. That's entirely understandable, and it's something that Polestar is absolutely not running away from. I asked that very directly, and they're actually embracing their Volvo heritage because it does bring them a lot at the moment. Polestar 2 is sort of like a startup company if that startup company was spun off by a major auto manufacturer. So for instance, if Tesla had been created by Toyota or General Motors or someone else and then sort of left off to play but had access to that major manufacturer's infrastructure, that's exactly what's going on with the Polestar 2. And that's supposedly why we might be seeing their models expand a little bit more rapidly than we have Tesla. So we have the Polestar 1 that came out last year, it's on sale now. The Polestar 2 will be shipping to customers a little bit later in 2020. And then sometime very, very soon, we'll be seeing the Polestar 3, their first crossover. Versus the closest relative on sale in the United States, the XC40, the Polestar 2 is about 7 inches longer, but this is 6 inches shorter than the Volvo S60, so it slots right in between. Now the Volvo S60 has absolutely no relationship to this model right here. It's built on a completely different platform, but what's interesting is that thanks to the stretch and the efficiencies of an electric vehicle layout, we don't really find that much less interior legroom than we find in the S60. Versus its very direct electric competitor, this is 3 inches shorter than a Model 3. Moving to the rear, we find full LED tail lamp modules. We have amber turn signals right back here, which is a nice touch. Now, filming them is a little bit tricky because, like modern Teslas, there's no start button in this vehicle. So I can't start the car open the door with the turn signal on and hop out and film it like I would normally do. I'd need another person, and I don't have another person with me. Instead, you start the Polestar by having the key or your phone in your pocket. You open the car, pull the door handle, hop in the car, put your foot on the brake, and simply put it in drive and drive away. And when you want to turn off the car, you put it in park and just leave the car. So unfortunately, when you put it in park and leave the car, the lights turn off. Although they styled the Polestar 2 very much like a sedan, this is in fact a liftback or a sportback, whatever you want to call it, so a little bit more like certain versions of the Audi A5 or of course the Audi A7. That gives us a lot of cargo practicality in the rear. Cargo space under this tonneau cover comes in about 15 cubic feet, but unlike most sedans, you could put a barbecue in here if you wanted to. You could just fold down the rear seats, take out this hard cover, and then just slide a barbecue right on in. Going in for a closer look, we for some reason have a bunch of umbrellas in here, but we also find a cargo divider, very similar to what we find in a lot of Volvo wagons. That's a really handy touch right there. And then if I lift the load floor, there's a little bit of additional storage space under there, but not enough to fit a 22-inch roller bag. The Polestar 2 was developed pretty rapidly as far as major car companies developing new products go. That was made possible by the fact that this platform was designed for electrification right from the very beginning. On the other hand, that may account for the curb weight because the Polestar 2, as it sits right here, weighs about 4,600 pounds. That is notably heavier than a Tesla Model 3. Polestar compensates for that by giving this a whole ton of power. Standard power, at least for the moment, is going to be 408 horsepower, 487 pound-feet of torque, courtesy of two identical electric motors, one in the front and one right back here in the rear. Now, even though these motors are identical, the software for the car does not treat them identically because they've designed this to have a rear power bias. And that's really obvious when you get this out on the road because this feels more like a rear-wheel, all-wheel drive car, perhaps something along the lines of a BMW M340i, which is incidentally just about as swift as this. They're claiming 0 to 60 in 4.45 seconds. That's made possible by an onboard 78 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. 75 kilowatt-hours are usable, which is just about the same as a Tesla Model 3. In case you forget your battery capacity, there's a little sticker right over here on the door that reminds you that you're driving a Polestar 2 and that it has a 78 kilowatt-hour battery. Interestingly enough, this is the only place on the car where it actually spells out Polestar. They said this was done so you can completely remove it. Everywhere else on the car, we simply get the Polestar logo, inside, outside, under the hood, etc. As with other EVs, the batteries are positioned nice and low in the Polestar 2 and very centrally for crash structure. However, unlike a Tesla, this is not a true skateboard battery pack. It's a modified skateboard because that gives us more legroom in the back and more leg comfort. It allows the footwell to be a little bit closer to the ground in the rear, giving you a more natural seating position. To do that, they basically cut out where the feet would go, and then they add extra batteries right back there under the rear seat. We see something very similar in some of the other new EVs that are coming out on the market. This battery pack is actively heated and actively cooled. Charging happens behind door number 1, where we find a standard J1772 charging connector and an onboard 11 kilowatt charger. I'm really intrigued by the charge rate because this is one of the faster standard onboard chargers available in the United States and definitely in direct competition to the Tesla lineup. This means that if you have access to a level 2 charging station at home or at the office or at the grocery store, etc., this will gain range much faster than some of those other EVs out there that are using 3.3 to 6.6 kilowatt onboard chargers. A nice touch with this charge door is that it has a little rubber seal all the way around it, so that way you don't have to pull a plug off the J1772 connector. There is a little cover over the DC fast charge connector, however. This will DC fast charge at 150 kilowatts. I don't know whether that will be updatable via a software update later, but it is worth noting that that is slower than the fastest versions of the Model 3 will charge. On the other hand, the SAE combo connector stations are starting to outnumber Tesla supercharger stations in the United States in terms of the number of connectors that are actually out there for you to use. So it's possible that this may at some point have an advantage over the supercharger network in terms of its reach, but at the moment, reach is pretty equal, and this is going to be a little bit slower. As you'd expect in a luxury car, there are a number of different wheel and tire options available. We're driving the largest wheels and the widest tires. Now, interestingly enough, the widest tires are also the skinniest tires because 245 with tires all the way around is the only way the Polestar comes. But in an even stranger twist, we don't get identical wheels. The wheels up front are a little bit narrower, the wheels in the rear are 1 inch wider. But Polestar puts the same size tire up front and in the rear on the differently sized wheels. They tell us that was all down to the way they decided to tune the suspension for handling. As you'd suspect, range is going to depend on the options that you select, and this particular model has the optional performance package on it, which means that we get grippier tires, we get the Brembo brakes, an adjustable suspension, not an adaptive suspension, and we get the yellow seat belts on the inside and a few extra touches here and there. But this is going to be the shortest range version of the Polestar 2. Most versions will probably come in around 250 miles. You'll probably start seeing the EPA ratings around the time you're watching this video. The day I'm driving this car, they told us that the EPA official ratings are probably still about 2 to 3 weeks away. Now, Polestar recently published a range test on the Polestar 2 where they got 205 miles out of this at 70 miles an hour with the air conditioning on. In that same test, a Tesla Model 3 with the performance option on that vehicle got 234 miles in that test. So range is still going to be lower in the Polestar 2, but likely over 200 miles for most folks out there. And Polestar said that their goal with that test was to try and give us a real-world range figure. They've also decided that all the instrument cluster and infotainment systems in there should give us a more realistic range figure rather than an optimistic range figure like we see in a lot of other EVs out there. It's worth noting that that Tesla Model 3 performance probably had a listed range of about 299 miles, depending on exactly which version of that Tesla Model 3 we're talking about. As you'd logically expect, the Polestar 2 shares a lot of seat technology with the Volvo brand, so we find a seat that is very, very similar to what we see in Volvo's smaller vehicles. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support here, multi-way adjustable driver's seat, 2-position memory over there on the door, and a manual tilt telescopic steering column. This is basically the same steering wheel and steering column that we find in the XC40. As we see in most European luxury vehicles, the front passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Due to the liftback design, the rear seat is surprisingly roomy. We don't have quite as much combined legroom, that's front row plus second row, as we find in the Model 3, but it's really not that far off. I still have about 4 inches of legroom left, with that front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. One thing worth noting is that we still have a transmission style tunnel right here in the middle of the vehicle. It's not a transmission tunnel since there really isn't a true transmission. Instead, they've actually located some of the batteries and the cables from the front to the rear right there in that tunnel. So the center passenger still has to hop over that. If I scoot over to the right side, this front seat is all the way back in its track, suitable for a taller person, and I still have about 1 inch of legroom left. According to Polestar, we have more headroom back here than we find in the Model 3, and this really does have a very square profile to the interior. Now, it does start sloping back there, so if I tried to put my head right back there against the rear headrests, then my hair starts brushing the ceiling, but I certainly have a lot of room back here. Even though this is a smaller sedan, this is one that could very easily accommodate 4 adults. Rear seat passengers don't get gypped, so we have these amber colored seat belts back here as well, not just up front, and the rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. If you want to put some larger items here, we do have a pass-through right here in the middle. You can open this up and put skis right there from the cargo area into the car. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in essentially a fully loaded version. One really cool touch up here is that on this standard glass roof, this is standard at the moment, it may not be later, we find a projected Polestar logo. That's really cool. It's actually being projected by a little module right here in this area, and it's reflecting on the glass. It's not etched there. This large glass moonroof is obviously pretty similar to what we find in a lot of modern Tesla models. It doesn't go quite as far back. It goes to just before the rear passengers' heads, and there is no standard shade included with this. It also is not an LCD glass moonroof, which I think is a little bit of a pity. We have 2-way adjustable headrests and height adjustable shoulder belts. Polestar isn't just about electrification and performance, it's also about environmental responsibility. So we find a lot of vegan and recycled materials in here and recyclable materials so that way once this car's life cycle is done, it can be recycled. We have fabric seats in the base model. It's kind of an interesting design. It feels sort of like a cross between fabric and neoprene. There's some imitation suede accents going on right there, a lot of stitching, and some different kinds of material for the different surfaces. Now, if you want leather, you can get leather. It is an available option, and that's Napa leather. Those are both heated and ventilated in the upper trims. Moving over to the door panels, we find a mixture of different materials going on. We have that same sort of fabric going on right there for the armrest. The speaker grills are behind fabric, which is kind of a new touch. And this little, what looks like a button right there is actually the Harman Kardon logo, because a Harman Kardon audio system is going to be standard for the Polestar 2, again, at least for the moment. We find some storage down there at the bottom. In a way, this interior feels a little bit like the other side of the coin for a Volvo interior. There is a little bit more fabric going on the dashboard, fabric insert right there. We still have a lot of premium materials, soft touch plastic up top, wood trim right there. But the color scheme and the design scheme is certainly a little bit more modern, a little bit more industrial, I guess you could say. There's a glove box right down here. It's a bin style. Had no problem fitting a larger tablet computer inside. And speaking of tablet computers, we have this enormous touchscreen right here in the dashboard, and it's now running Google's Android operating system. Let's go quickly through the system's features, and hopefully we'll have a more in-depth video later. This is running Google's Android system, but it is not Android Auto. Although interestingly enough, Apple CarPlay will work with this system. We're told to expect that by the time this car is actually sold to customers. This software is a little bit more of a pre-production software generation. You can see that we have on-screen settings for the climate control right there. Very easy direct access buttons to things like the 360-degree camera system right there if we want to activate that. Parking sensors right there. Car settings here for drive. You can adjust the steering feel, standard, firm, light, turn the ESC into sport mode if you want to. This adjusts the throttle lift-off regen braking, so you can coast, have low, or standard. Standard will take you to a complete stop and keep you there, and then you could turn the creep on or off. That's moving forward just by taking your foot off the brake pedal. We have easier to use screens than we find in the current Volvo lineup for adjusting the assist settings. You can adjust the way the vehicle charges there. You just slide that to how much of the battery you want to charge. So for instance, 100% right there. And then once you're plugged in, you would be able to adjust the charge rate depending on the charger that you're connected to. Under here, under more, we have car status, interior lights. You can adjust the ambient lighting, the exterior lighting. Moving over to the home screen, you'll see that we have integrated Google Maps. This does use Google Mapping for everything in the system. You'll notice this looks very similar to what we see in modern Teslas because they're also using a Google Mapping interface in that model. We can choose different routes there. You can see those calculated right there. You can find charging stations. It will give you an estimated charge by the time you arrive at that particular destination. And you can choose those route options there, avoid highways, tolls, ferries, etc. You'll notice this is significantly faster than Volvo's current infotainment lineup, and this is exactly the same software package that we're expecting to see in modern Volvos coming very, very soon. The home screen is divided into different quadrants, and additional apps are available via the Google Play Store. Interestingly enough, I searched for Waze and I didn't find Waze in here, so hopefully Waze will be available for this system natively at some point later. One of the Polestar people was saying, I don't know why you'd want to use Apple CarPlay when we have Google built in right here. I would want to use CarPlay or Android Auto just to get Waze. I use that an awful lot. There are a lot of additional settings right there under that, so where you adjust things like the displays, the sound, the Bluetooth, etc. The P button up here is where we can add additional user profiles. There are a ton of different profiles that you can add to the car, so that way anybody that uses the vehicle can have their own profile and their own Google login. This is all tied with your Google login, which is kind of interesting. The system supports swipe gestures, so if I swipe up from the bottom, you'll see that I get some different things here. I can look for a charging station, restaurant right there very directly. I can track forward, backward right there on that little pop-up screen. And then I have access to the climate control settings over here. If I went ahead and clicked on that, you can see that we have auto right there. We can click the central icon and adjust the temperature. We can unsynchronize the two sides if you want dual zone climate control. One of the cool things about this system is that we have that Google integration. So you can say, hey Google, set driver temperature to 70 degrees.
Okay, changing the temperature for the driver to 70 degrees.
And you can speak to the system in a natural way, much like you would your Google Assistant at home. It's basically the same software. Continuing down from there, we have a wireless charging mat. We have some buttons over here. Play pause, that has haptic feedback, hazard light button, and then shortcuts for the defogger and defroster. This is the vehicle shifter, so pull one back for drive, push all the way forward for reverse, press P for park right there. This is not a double tap shifter like we find in the Volvo lineup. We have a kind of chunky center console here with additional storage on each side, one easily accessible cup holder, and then oddly, one cup holder right there under that center armrest that also doubles as the storage area. There's just enough room for one can of Coke to be right there under that armrest. I do wish we had two cup holders a little bit more easily accessible. In addition to the large infotainment screen, we also have this large LCD instrument cluster over here. It has a few different views. We have a full map view, which gives you that turn-by-turn direction that you'd expect there, along with Google Mapping. We get a simplified layout here where we simply see our speed, power, and charge gauge over there on the right, battery capacity, etc. And then a display that gives us a little bit more information on the active safety systems. If we move out from there, we find basically the same steering wheel that we see in the Volvo XC40. This is basically the same airbag cover there and basically the same buttons. These buttons relate to the adaptive cruise control system as well as the lane keeping system. And then over here we have buttons that control that multifunction LCD right there. You can see that. Track forward, backward, volume up, down buttons. So what's the Polestar 2 like to drive? Well, clearly it's hard to talk about an electric vehicle without talking about a Tesla. And clearly this is a direct competitor to the Model 3. And it reminds me a reasonable amount of the Model 3, especially when it comes to acceleration. Now, Polestar is claiming 0 to 60 happens in 4.45 seconds. That's just about right in our initial testing out here. I am driving this in Northern California, but not in my usual area. However, I did happen to bring my very handy dandy 0 to 60 tester with me, and this went 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds flat. That's absolutely excellent considering the curb weight of the Polestar 2, which is about 4,600 pounds. It's worth noting that this is heavier than a Tesla Model 3. According to Polestar, the 60 to 0 stopping distance should be 115 feet. In my very initial testing out here on a regular road surface, I ended up at around 118 feet, so I think 115 feet is probably doable out on a grippier surface like a track. Now, when it comes to handling, this handles very, very well. We're driving the Performance Pack equipped model. You can tell that by the yellow seat belts that I'm strapped in by. And you can also tell that by the increased grip versus the base model. Now, all versions of the Polestar 2 are going to get the same tire size, 245 with tires all the way around. But really interestingly, Polestar gives us wider wheels in the back and slightly narrower wheels up front. There's about a 1-inch difference in wheel width, and that's all due to the suspension tuning and the dynamic tuning that they decided to do with the Polestar 2. This has a rear-wheel drive bias. Even though the motors are identical, they tell us that generally speaking, unless you're commanding full power or there's a stickier situation, it's going to try and send a little bit more power to the rear. That, coupled with the near-perfect 50-50 weight balance, really makes this feel sort of like an electric BMW, I guess you'd say. Now, when you get to some of these more aggressive corners, you can definitely hear the tires squealing just a little bit, resisting that turn, but this doesn't feel front heavy at all. So this feels very, very different dynamically than any other Volvo out there. In some ways, this reminds me a little bit more of a scaled down Model S than necessarily a Tesla Model 3, which I also found a little bit interesting. Now, clearly I don't have access to a skid pad. Hopefully we will at some point soon. Now, today I'm driving a Polestar 2 with the Performance package on it, and that means that this model has adjustable dampers, but they're not adaptive dampers, so you can't electronically control them through this infotainment system. Instead, you actually have to change a physical knob on the damper itself in order to adjust its settings. According to the Polestar folks, this particular model is set at the mid-level of firmness, and it is a pretty firm ride. When it comes to the ride quality, I think that this is a little bit closer to something like a BMW M3 than the Tesla Model 3. This definitely has a firmer, sportier feel to it. And for the moment, that includes the sportiest version of the Tesla Model 3 currently available. I haven't been able to run this through my usual cabin noise testing procedure, but I suspect that this is going to be a little bit louder than the average compact luxury sedan. It appears to be a little bit louder in here than something like the Volvo S60. Now, the Volvo S60 is an interesting comparison, and one that I got asked about a lot over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos. This is completely unrelated to the S60. The S60 is riding on Volvo's SPA platform, that's their mid-size and larger platform, and this is riding on the compact modular architecture platform, the CMA platform, that underpins the Volvo XC40, a number of Link and Company products, one Geely product, and then of course the Polestar 2 that I'm driving right here, which has been stretched versus the XC40, so this is almost in the compact segment. Trust me, I'm not being hyperbolic here when I say that this Polestar 2 really is the first electric vehicle that we've seen in the United States that has the ability to really compete very directly with Tesla. You can tell when you floor it that this certainly does not feel like a compliance electric vehicle. Polestar is really bringing it, and they're also bringing over-the-air updates that they promise will improve functionality. Speaking of over-the-air updates, this vehicle should be able to receive all the latest software from Polestar. And remember that Polestar and Volvo are sharing a lot of technologies from one to the other. So this is the first vehicle with the Google Infotainment system, but this is also the first vehicle to get a retuned version of Volvo's semi-autonomous driving system. This is still a hands-on-the-wheel driving system, so it's going to be very much like autopilot and very much like the systems that we find in Volvo models, but a little bit different than Super Cruise, which allows you a hands-off-the-wheel driving experience. This definitely seems more aggressive at lane centering and better at keeping you in that lane versus the last Volvo that we recently drove. But at the moment, the capabilities of this system are very similar to the Volvo lineups. This is not going to change lanes for you just yet. Since I've been driving this pretty hard out here on some of my favorite winding mountain roads, I used to drive on this road every single day, so I know it incredibly well. This is just an awful lot of fun, and so I haven't really been driving it gently. I have no idea what the range is really going to be like. Polestar is suggesting that this is probably going to come in with an EPA rating of around 250 miles. So in terms of range, this is unlikely to be as high as the longest range version of the Model 3 because it seems like Polestar is focused definitely more on performance than they've been focusing on economy. They also have a strong focus on safety, and that's logically why this is a little bit heavier. Now's a good time to talk about braking. We have adjustable regen braking in here, which sounds similar to what we see in the Tesla lineup, but an important consideration is that this has a blended braking system. So right now I have the one pedal drive off, which means no lift-off regeneration at all, but if I put my foot on the brake pedal, then it starts regenerating power into the battery. That's not what we see in the Tesla lineup. In the Tesla lineup, you only get throttle lift-off regeneration at the moment. So that regen that you feel when you pull your foot off the accelerator pedal, that's all you get. If you press on the brake pedal, you get friction braking. On this model, you don't get friction braking until you command really quite a lot of braking. I can stop very aggressively, and this little chart right here in the instrument cluster will tell me when the friction brakes catch on, and you have to get really aggressive with the stopping in order to get the friction brakes involved here. Now, if you want a true one-pedal drive experience, this will do it. It has a very aggressive stop here, and it will take you to, finally here, eventually, a complete stop, and of course, hold you here. There's also an adjustable creep function. So if you want to be able to stop at that stoplight, take your foot off the pedals, and then go when you hit the accelerator pedal again, you can turn the creep feature off, and that will just hold you in place. One of the reasons that Polestar says that they had to be separate from Volvo is that they felt that everything about the vehicle needed to be tuned differently than what a normal Volvo customer would be expecting. And I think that that is noticeable because the steering is definitely weighted differently than we find in modern Volvos, and we have just a hint of extra steering feel. They've also tuned this to certainly be more dynamic in the corners. When you floor it, it has that strong rear wheel bias, so you can feel the rear end just stepping out a little bit before the traction control kicks in. It is certainly a different feel than we find in any modern Volvo out there right now. Bottom line out on the road, the Polestar 2 is an absolute hoot and a half, and hopefully I'll be able to drive the non-performance pack version at some point soon, because its suspension is going to be set up a little bit differently. I'll let you all refer to the pricing chart on the side of your screen for the detailed pricing for the Polestar 2. There has been a very recent price drop on the Polestar 2 to help make this a little bit more competitive in the EV segment. This is going to be more expensive than a base Model 3 any way you slice it, however. That's because Polestar is, at least for the moment, not competing with that base Model 3. Instead, they're trying to target more midline and top-end trims of the Model 3, which are going to be fairly similarly priced after you exclude the federal tax credit. This is going to qualify for the full $7,500 tax credit. Tesla currently has zero federal tax credit, and additional state and local incentives depending on the area of the country you live in. That could end up dropping this price down by about $10,000. Most luxury car shoppers out there are going to qualify for the full federal tax credits, so that means that this is going to be right in the same kind of neighborhood price-wise as the BMW 3 Series, the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, Volvo's own S60, and of course that Tesla Model 3. I think if I were spending my cash and I were in an area where the Polestar 2 was available, I would buy this over the Model 3. I think it just looks more unique. It also has much better build quality, to be perfectly honest. This is a pre-production prototype vehicle, and all of the panels are aligned beautifully. The fit and finish is really good. The paint looks much better than the Tesla Model 3 that I bought not that long ago. This feels like a car built like a car company that makes cars for a living. I know that sounds kind of strange, but Tesla does an awful lot of things really, really, really well. But fit and finish and paint quality are not on that list. I don't generally talk about fit and finish and paint quality in videos here at Alex on Autos because honestly, most major car companies aren't really that far off one another, except for Tesla. Tesla definitely really falls behind in that particular area, but the Polestar 2 here looks perfect. If you want to get your hands on a Polestar 2, there are going to be models available very, very soon. You'll go to a showroom. The showrooms are interestingly owned by franchised dealer networks. They're not going to be direct sales like we see in the Tesla lineup. But those showrooms are going to be different because they're not going to have any Polestars that you can drive away in. You'll decide what you want, and then they will see if they have it in inventory. It will then get shipped up to them. You'll have it in about 7 days or so. But if you want something that's not in stock, then it'll have to get custom built and shipped from China, and then you'll have to wait a few months. Yes, you heard that right. This is going to be built in China, at least for the moment, and it's going to be built, interestingly enough, in the Volvo factory, where they're also building Volvo models for the Asian market. Later on in Polestar's life, if we start seeing vehicles being built on Volvo's other platforms, it's possible that they could be built anywhere around the world, but at the moment, they're being built in China. Be sure and let me know what you think about the Polestar 2 down there in the comment section below, and hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on this for a slightly longer video that is done without the wind whirling around me, without smoke in the air, without sort of the ongoing pandemic disaster, etc. Let me know what you think about this down there in the comment section below, and we'll try and address it in that video that's coming up very soon. So be sure and hit that subscribe button. Find us over at facebook.com/AlexAutos, Instagram, all those other social places. And again, I'm really, really sorry for this rushed video, but I really do like the Polestar 2.